and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with your hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Here we focus on helping men and those with men in their lives solve some of life's complex challenges through understanding the practices of mindfulness and how they can help. Each episode is in an environment free of judgment and criticism, with a focus on authenticity and inner peace. Let's dig in.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Men Talking Mindfulness on our special sub-series, Masculinity 2.0, where we're upgrading masculinity right here on the air and helping men become more aware of aspects of their life that they can improve on to kind of get away from the toxic masculinity, if you will, the confined masculinity as well. This is upgrade number 5. Here's a little quote from our guest today, Ed Frauenheim. We need our full humanity as men to survive and heal from serious health scares. That is, we need to embrace the entirety of the male symbol. We need the arrow, the strength, the clarity of direction, the assertiveness. We need the circle, the connectivity to others, the vulnerability, the compassion. Cutting off any part of it deadens us as a man, can leave us dead prematurely. But being a whole man, an arrow and a circle man, frees us to feel fully alive. At least that's what my healing heart and head have taught me. So, hey, once again, Ed Frauenheim, our author of Reinventing Masculinity, is back joining us today. We had a second season, I think we had you on, Ed, with Reinventing Masculinity, and it really taught us a lot and actually helped create a lot of the vernacular that we continually use here on Men Talking Mindfulness about liberating masculinity versus confined masculinity, what they look like. We're also going to dig into the 5 C's a little bit today. So Ed, welcome back to the show and welcome to Masculinity 2.0. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Will. Great to be with you and John.
Yeah, we're very excited as we are covering, or just quickly for our audience, the 3 of us were sitting here before we hit record, and I held up my empty glass of water. I'm like, oh man, I've got an empty glass of water. But the normal John, or the former John, the confined masculinity John, would have been like, I'm just going to leave that glass of water over there. I'm going to suck it up. I can make it through this show without drinking any water. But then I admitted to these fine gentlemen, and they're like, hey, we need water too. And we all broke off and we went and got our water, because guess what? We're human beings. We need it. But
love it.
Yeah, and Ed, we love everything about reinventing masculinity, and then this new article that you've written, the circle. What is it? Had it here. Arrow and circle men. What a heart attack and anxiety taught me about being a man. This article, as I was saying before we hit record, just really spoke to me, and I'm just going to jump right in and read a bit of it. And then I promise we're going to turn it over to you to actually talk. Besides, it's not just going to be me and Will reading your article.
That's like, what a great day that is for me.
All right. So here, again, I feel almost as though I could have written these, because this is a feeling that I have inside me. But you write coronary, thank you. Wow. Artery spasms aren't perfectly understood, but chief suspects for them include extreme emotional stress, smoking, and illegal stimulants like meth and cocaine. Since I'm not a smoker or a coke user, stress was likely the culprit. I was juggling a lot. My full plate wasn't about trying to put food on the table for my family. Now, many times as men, and this is not part of what you wrote, but many times as men, we do convince ourselves that this is the case, that, hey, we're doing this for our family. We're doing this to put food on the table. We're doing this to provide some kind of security. But in fact, a lot of the time it's actually ego. I don't know if you're a Breaking Bad fan, but in Breaking Bad, there's a scene all throughout the entire series. He talks about how he's cooking up meth in this RV and raising millions of dollars for his family. And then finally, at the very end of the show, he admits, you know what, this wasn't about the family. This wasn't about you at all. It was all about me. I wanted to do it for my ego. And I personally struggle with this. A lot of the time people will come to me and say, hey, can you help me with this project? Or can you collaborate with me on this? And I want to. And it's not, in complete honesty, not all for them. And it's also not all for putting food on the table. It's for ego. I want to be the hero to kind of fix this person, fix this organization, whatever the case may be. Now, you go on to say that you also needed to parent less or less intensely. These work and parenting shifts also reflect a more mature, integrated masculinity, I think. If we only align ourselves with the arrow energy, so that's from the arrow in the circle man symbol, we men can work ourselves sick. When our aim and our self-worth are all about achievement and reaching goals, we will all but kill ourselves climbing the corporate ladder. Purely arrow parenting, for its part, is about disciplining, controlling, and protecting our kids. To some extent, we must do those things as dads, but we fathers also have to release our children into the wider world. We have to trust them and trust the community to care for them. And if we want to be present for our kids as well as avoid burning out on the job, we have to temper our time working. We have to make space for connecting with our children. That's enough of me reading what you wrote, but I was like, oh my gosh, these lines from that article really spoke to me so much. And I wonder if you could just kind of expound a little bit on that and talk to what I just talked about there about the arrow versus the circle in both the professional and the personal lives.
Thanks, John. I'm really gratified that both you and Will have found this essay meaningful. It was not something I'd really planned to do. It came out of a heart attack and an anxiety attack, as I mentioned, and probably was out of that stress that the section you were just reading. But I would say that we have allowed the divine feminine, the feminine qualities, those circle qualities, to get squeezed out of us as men because of confined masculinity. That is to say, these cramped views of how we're supposed to show up as men, the roles we can play, the ways we can relate. I believe that they really have taken out what's fundamental to our human nature, that are more these feminine or divine feminine qualities or energies, you might say, like the ones you just mentioned, John, the connectivity, the receptiveness, the pure presence, not going anywhere, just being with your kids, say, as opposed to feeling like you got to, progress, in that arrow sense. And we need both those energies, I believe, to really live fully. And that heart attack and anxiety attack really were reminders to me to practice what I preach and to really try to live that more integrated life.
Yeah, it's that's also another piece that's really tough as men is we're very good about telling people how to live their lives and then living something completely else. Hey, you need to take a break. You need to rest. And then we go and grind until we have a heart attack or a panic attack, an anxiety attack. So it's pretty wild, the difference in what we preach and what we practice. So hopefully I'm going to be better about practicing a lot of what you mentioned and saying no more often and just realizing, hey, you know what, we have to cut back for our own mental and physical health. And then for the relationships that we supposedly care so much about. If we say that our families are priority, but in actuality, it's really about ego and work, we're not living what we preach. Over to you, Will.
Well, no, how much, Ed, were you aware of these circular qualities? And maybe we could just kind of like break down what those, we kind of, I mentioned them in the opening, quote about it. It's a connection, compassion, vulnerability. So maybe we can kind of, maybe like, or we can go into like the typical masculine or like the very, what we identify as masculine in our society as like really that arrow, like that, when I went through, I had 2 yoga trainings, and the second yoga training I went through was with a female teacher, and it was a divine feminine training. So I really wanted to get in touch. Like I grew up in a very hyper masculine family and household, and a lot of men and boys growing out around me as I grew up, and like all about tough and succeeding and crushing a competition and blowing stuff up and burning shit and and being tough. You know what I mean? Like I mean, it's just like hey, I gotta say, I mean, not saying it wasn't fun. I mean, I had a good childhood. I had a good mom that really helped me get into the circular aspect of things. But in this training, this second yoga training that I went to, it was never really clear to me that the way energetically kind of the feminine and masculine side, or men and women, right? But also the feminine and masculine that exist in all of us, right? Whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, or however you identify. I mean, this energy is part of us. I mean, they talk about it even in the yoga tradition. They talk about how the chakras, they kind of wind around each other, right? And it's the Ida and the Pingala, right? And the Ida is the masculine, like the Pingala is the feminine energy, and they intertwine throughout all of us. And one thing that became clear to me, and I really began to understand, this masculine and feminine, is like the linearity in men, like trying to get stuff done, trying to succeed, like doing your checklists, like, you guys, both of you spoke of the anxiety of being a father, and I understand the anxiety of running a business, and, just got to get stuff done, keep growing, keep going, keep moving forward. And then the other side that this training helped me understand was the circular nature of feminine, and how it's like community energy, connection, compassion, and these softer qualities of that a confined masculine, right, or toxic masculine would typically ignore, or has been taught to ignore. So so why don't you just start breaking down this arrow and circle, and then see where we can move from there.
Sure. I love the way you expanded on some of those divine feminine energies, Will, and then from yoga. And I've got a lot of my perspective from yoga classes as well. I had never heard of those particular terms, but I gather that even like the sides of the body are sometimes conceived of as one is the Shiva side.
Left is left is the heart side, is the feminine side, right?
Yeah.
And this is like also the heart. This is how we connect to the world. This is our this is another. So I'm going to go down the yoga rabbit hole for a second. So this is the left side, and even the left foot is considered our feminine root. So that's the way we kind of step in the world, right? It's the heart energy in the left side, and this is the way that we connect. This is the way that we connect to the world, and it's usually, again, it's all kind of from that heartful space. If we have that capacity to be heartful, and then the right side is the masculine side, and even the right foot is the masculine root, the way we kind of step into the world. And that's like we sign the checks, we write the contracts, like and do things in a very contractual and also transactional way. Is the right side, but we have both sides. So yeah,
I love that, and I would say for a lot of guys, this concept might feel foreign, or they might not believe in it. But I think that if we take a closer look at how most of us are raised, we will see that feminine side gets smushed out. Like many of us have memories of when we're very young, or we can hear stories from when we were really young from our mothers, often about a lot of compassion, expressions of love we had, or feelings of harmony with others. A story that I think I put in this essay, or else in another piece of my writing, was singing in church when I was like 4 years old. And it was probably one of the most powerful spiritual moments I had of I was standing on the church pew, because that was how small I was, and sort of to be kind of close to the grown-ups in height and see the folk band at the front of this Catholic church I went to outside in Buffalo, in the suburb of Buffalo. That was a moment of unity. It was a moment of harmony. It was a moment of connection. It wasn't about the arrow energy, but I had arrow energy as a kid too. I lived running around and got into sports. But we often have those qualities as boys that are kind of stripped away. And Bell Hooks, the author, died not long ago, talks really powerfully about boys being kind of yanked from the wisdom and the love and the connection to the mother, because you don't want to be a mother's
mama's boy,
mama's boy, right?
It's funny. We all know that term, right?
It's very explicit. Boys don't cry. We're not supposed to be emotionally expressive, which is about that sort of receiving and feeling our emotions, the intuition. So a lot of this stuff just gets smushed out, and also then all the playground stuff of are you tough enough, and how are you going to fit into these pecking orders that often take shape pretty early on in the playgrounds, if not within classrooms. So it's in that masculinity symbol that we've gravitated to as a society since the Greeks onward, probably. The circle is right there, and so is the arrow, or in the yin yang of the Eastern, which has got a lot of similar concepts, right? It's in the yoga tradition. These things it's kind of hidden in plain sight that we have masculine and feminine, but we tend in the West, especially, to ignore that past or not see how it has been taken from us.
Yeah. John. Yeah, please.
Well, I like also the fact that you went back to your spiritual upbringing, and you mentioned that in this article as well, and you specifically said something to the effect of the spiritual journeys, or anyone who wants to do any research into any type of spiritual aspects or mindfulness, like Will and I are doing, that's kind of woo-woo and kind of looked at as feminine. And you said that you had bought into these biases, and even though I've long been drawn to explore the sacred, I've harbored shame about that desire. And I will tell you, there's times, even though this is the space that I work in, and I try very hard to kind of temper the hyper masculine side of things, when people ask me what I do and I tell them that I teach mindfulness, there's 100% honesty. There's a little bit of shame, like, oh man, I teach such a woo-woo thing. and I know it's the ego and the masculinity coming in,
right.
Like, and then there's instantly like this desire to be like, but I'm also a consultant, and I also teach,
and I'm also a former, special forces guy.
Right, exactly. Well, how is that received, John, when you say that to other people? Or to other men, maybe. Do you feel? You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's funny because I've talked about this before. Is there's this feeling that as soon as I say that, people are going to kind of feel sorry for me, or like their eyes are going to glaze over and be like, oh, this guy's such a weirdo. But it's never that way. It's normally like, oh, really? Tell me more about that. And it's really interesting. But there's just this, it must be that masculine side that is coming into play. Like, I need to be doing something that is making more money, providing more. I need more, like that kind of ego,
or being like construction worker, or like, I'm fucking like building the world, and
which there's nothing wrong with
not at all
either. But there's just that masculine side of me wants to tell them that I do something else besides teach something. I try to separate mindfulness from religion, but I will say that there is a spirituality to it. And when I say that, there's that kind of, like you said, you bought into it and almost felt a shameful feeling about it. Could you unpack that a little bit, Ed?
Yeah, and I was interested to find, as I was writing that piece, that men are less spiritually curious than women. In the same way that I think you were describing, John. And I think that's why we have this fear that we're going to sound woo-woo or kind of weird, because we're not a more traditional man in that regard, that we're material, we're physical or concrete. This is getting into the intuitive, the soulful stuff that I think is often more that feminine area, that energy. So I think it's not surprising that both of us have bought into that message that we're supposed to be disinterested in matters of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about the major male figures in religions, they don't show up as traditionally male either. Like Jesus was not, warrior guy. In the sense, he was a warrior for peace, say, or he persistent and willing to sacrifice, but he was not. He's like, turn the other cheek. He was a peace guy. You think about Buddha's role was the image of Buddha is also similarly like, I'm going to just accept what's going on, and I'm not going to be aggressive. I think there's you think about some of our current spiritual leaders like the Dalai Lama and their focus on peace, even if it's super determined. Many of these spirit-based traditions have they have males that are embodying both energies, I would say. Yeah. And another thing to add to that mix that's helped me to get past that message that of the woo-woo was bad is to see the power of the feminine. The feminine isn't just receptive, or if it is receptive, part of that receptivity leads to power. And we think of like Kali in the Hindu tradition, who's like out there eating demons. They're like rampaging to save the good. And or you think about the courage of the women of the Christian Bible, like Mary, the Mother of God, Mary Magdalene. All the disciples are hiding. The male disciples. It's the women that are courageous enough to stick with Jesus. So there's a lot of ways of seeing power within the divine feminine that I think we also miss out on if we reject it.
Absolutely.
Well, power in the sense of like, speaking of like Kali, it's like, it's almost like, I know that's a horn. It's New York. What am I going to do? But I mean, it's like, focus everybody.
Raw, uncut, and unapologetic.
Yeah, exactly. But it makes me a little rageful. Anyway, but even like Kali, like, it's like, yeah, feminine entity, but would be expressing like masculine qualities in that regard. You know what I mean? In that way, so it definitely goes both ways. I mean, it absolutely, it does. I just wanted to kind of put that out there. And I'm really distracted by this horn, guys. I'm sorry.
Well, I'll jump into,
but yeah, please do.
Another piece that you talk about, and we talked about this in Reinventing Masculinity, but you actually felt it physically manifest in that, because we're so ego-driven, materialistic as masculine types. Often we put ourselves on the back burner, and that includes taking care of our health. We won't go to see the doctor as often as women do. We admit that, or rather, we won't admit that something that we're experiencing is in fact a sickness, except the man cold. My wife will tell you that the man cold is the worst thing out there, and all men will claim the same. But when it comes to anything that has to do with aging or accepting some level of quote unquote weakness, we were like, no, that's not happening to me. There's no way I'm having a heart attack. But then you did in fact experience a heart attack, and it was not due to the typical causes of a heart attack. Can you talk about your heart attack experience and then the anxiety attack afterwards, and how that has changed how you perceive life, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Thanks, John. My heart attack was not traditional in the sense of the plaque buildup on the arteries of the heart from, say, eating poorly, say, or being really unfit. I'm pretty fit. Although I just am been working to lose the COVID-19, 19 pounds that I put on during COVID. I'm down to about 9 so far.
Nice.
But I was stressed, as we talked about before, and that led to this crimping of an artery. It's literally, I saw a picture when the doctors at Kaiser Permanente did this amazing procedure. They went in with a camera through my wrist. I had basically felt weak and nauseous on the sidewalk, like a typical expression of a heart attack, but it wasn't a dramatic one. I wasn't knocked out. I did call the doctor, even though my wife was first like, maybe you just need to have a little bit of breakfast. Because I can be a little hypochondriac. This is one of my challenges as someone who's wrestled with anxiety also. But when I got in there, they said, they found this problem was a crimping, like a clenching of the artery, and then they squirted some nitroglycerin through this tube that would also had a camera in it, and it just opened up again. So I was really lucky in that regard to have that. And a piece that I'll say around, what one of those early lessons was when I went into the hospital with this heart attack or with this concern. I was trying to be that playful tough guy up until while I'm sitting or lying in a gurney. They're doing all the blood tests to see if there was evidence of a heart attack. And at one point, a woman doctor came up to me and said, "Yes, you did have a heart attack. Your blood levels showed troponin, this marker of heart attacks." And she put her hand on my lower thigh, lower leg, and said, "I know this is a lot to take in, but you're in the right place, so we're going to take care of you." And that was the moment where I let that hypermasculine shield drop. And I just started crying. I was like, this is scary stuff for me and for everyone around me. Again, it's sort of like practicing what we preach. I know that I'm, as someone who's written a book about this topic, the importance of vulnerability, of being open and not trying to have that armor up all the time. But I still had it up, and that is what it's. I don't know if I could have kept it up anymore, because it was just such a kind, loving gesture on the part of that doctor. She didn't have to give me a small physical touch at that point, or even say those words. She could have just said, here's the next procedure. Instead, it was like this compassionate gesture. I understand you might be, hurting and scared, and I'm going to try to relieve that.
Well, I think it's interesting how so naturally the shield went up, right? With that. So it's just like the program kicked in. It's like, everything's fine. I'll be in and out in 5 minutes. And you know what I mean? It's not that big of a deal. And, and I mean, is that coming from, just to kind of go down, I guess, that kind of masculine shield for a moment, just to, for people to identify with it, or just to understand it. Like, what, if you remember what was going through your head, was it like, about your family and your wife and or that kind of thing?
I think, Will, it was this movie that plays in the back of a lot of our heads, that we're supposed to be that hyper masculine guy that is all the arrow and protecting ourselves and protecting others. And I think it was probably like, it was a shield from fear. I wasn't letting myself feel the fear I really was feeling, or not letting myself express it. And then that came down and I felt the fear, or at least, or I became more conscious of what was, I think, happening in me on some level.
Well, also maybe protecting yourself from the circle, or not wanting to go there. Right. And then here it is. I mean, you said it was a female doctor, and she is expressing, that circular energy of compassion and literally making connection with you. And it's just like her energy literally touching your, energy as like, the arrow masculine, if you will. And it's just like, boom, you just melted. And it was just, like getting down, we call it embracing your full humanity, like really being human in that moment. And part of that, humanity is really being authentic with what's going on, and being honest with what's going on, and recognizing those feelings instead of running away from them. And that's just like, it sets up a nice, beautiful picture of as far as like what's possible, but if you want to comment on that, or.
Yeah, I think you put it really well there. And I think there's something about the power of touch and being in touch with our bodies completely. That so many of us guys are not. We only see the body in play in the sports arena, or maybe in the bedroom, but those are like the only places. Maybe we like to eat, but there's all these other ways we can be aware of our bodies and of our health that we tend to ignore. That if we paid more attention to those circular, more feminine energies around, how are we doing, and how are we in a still place, not just going to the goal, or having sex. So I think that the touch really helped settle me and allowed that shield to fall in that moment. Should I go on to the anxiety piece too? Because I think there's some interesting stuff there, as John asked. I just don't want to.
Please.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that was kind of a big deal for me to acknowledge the extent to which I've wrestled with anxiety in this piece. I know you guys are doing such a great work to destigmatize mental illness and mental health challenges. And, I acknowledged in this piece that I've wrestled with anxiety especially some bad episodes, a couple of times in my life. And I had an anxiety attack that I was having more heart attacks soon after I got out of the hospital. And I understand that's actually not that uncommon.
I'm sure
that many guys do feel like they might be having another one. And in this health issue, it's just not, we should stop seeing mental health as completely not health, right? It's not unlike physical health, other medical problems. The receptivity I needed to engage in with my wider community, as well as a mental health professional, a Kaiser counselor, was so important to me getting through it, healing from it. And that included some real reflection and reconnection with, even peacemaking with my father along the way. If you guys remember that piece of it, I had to really kind of look back at a thing
Yeah.
my counselor said, which is maybe you need to grieve your childhood
Yeah.
because of the level of fear that my dad's kind of bad temper created, in me as a kid. And so there was a lot of healing that I was able to do once I embraced the circle in those moments, including, the spiritual part of the circle. And I am really grateful that I have so many people around me that, not unlike what you said, John, when you say you're a mindfulness teacher, people are often curious and welcoming. I had that in spades as well. And I think we men in general underestimate how us reaching out and being vulnerable can lead to wonderful deepening of our relationships.
For sure. And talk, I want to go back to that grieving your childhood piece. That was also a piece that kind of floored me. And you went from there into talking about broken masculinity. The term you used the term broken masculinity, and you specifically said how heart trauma can lead to head trauma. Can you explain what that means there?
Yeah. I was surprised to see that people had studied this topic of guys having heart attacks, and many times they have heart attacks and then they are in denial of mental health challenges that come in the wake. And that these researchers, they coined the term broken masculinity, which I was jealous of. It's a great term.
It's a good term.
But they found that men stop feeling that sense of their power as fathers, as professionals, as spouses, because some deep essential part of their strength, their invincibility had been cracked, if you will.
Right.
And so those guys, not only do they suffer mental health challenges, depression and anxiety after a heart attack, but they won't get help. So the heart trauma leads to head trauma that often is not treated, which then makes it worse.
Yeah, it's terrible. And then you go on even further, talk about how we don't connect, and because we're not connecting with our community, that actually leads to shortened lives and impoverished. I think you used the term impoverished lives, where we're basically just living as a shell of a human. We're not really living a life. And how important connecting is, and that goes back to the circle piece of the male symbol. Can we talk about how important connecting is?
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you raised that up, because that is such a now known factor for happiness and long health is your friendships. Basically, you guys maybe know of this Harvard longevity study. The main factor for whether you're going to live long and be happy is not even fitness levels or diet, it's your friendships. And so many guys, we have this loneliness epidemic among men. And I know you guys have probably talked about this in other shows. Guys have got to, if we want to be healthier, we've got to build up that relationship muscle, if you will, to embrace connection, because and it's harder in the current era. The pandemic made it harder to go out to maybe do some of the stuff you did with your guys. We don't have the bowling leagues like we used to, and work is not as stable. So that's not surprising that in some ways we've seen male friendships decline over time and male loneliness and suicide increase. So yes, we need to connect more and to embrace it as part of who we are as human beings, as men, where it's not gay to build friendships. Not that there's anything wrong with being gay, but I think that's what prevents a lot of guys from
absolutely
friendships.
I remember Will, you and I had this discussion. You had made a friend in New York City, a male friend, and you guys went to the beach. I remember, and you're like, I don't think I've ever done that. Gone to the beach with a male friend that I just met because of like, and not that we feel that there's anything wrong with being gay or not, but that it's just that feeling of being perceived as someone who's leaning in on a relationship, which is anti-masculine. I'm masculine. I don't need any friends. And you use the term of basically being an island in and of yourself. How important it is to be connected, because being an island, we can't make it through this life alone.
No. And we don't do it healthy. Yeah. I'm sorry, John.
We don't do it healthy. We don't do it healthy at all. And most of our friends, quote unquote, are really colleagues. that they're not, really good
Right.
friends. And then social media has made it easier to connect, but actually what you're doing is disconnecting. So it's kind of a catch-22 double-edged sword there, with connecting. Sorry, Will, I know now I'm rambling.
No,
Back
you're
over
not
to
at
you.
all, John. I mean, I just actually had, and I got to say, it's a lot of fucking fun to hang with the guys. It really it really is. Like, I actually had an opportunity last Friday. Two friends that because of the pandemic and and our lives, like we the last time we hung out together, and not just as men, but we had other people that was in New Year's. We went from 2020 to 2021, up on my friend's farm and stuff. It was really, really cool, a lot of fun. But it was the last time that the three of us were able to hang out together. And I just was able to do that last Friday. Like, yeah, right. It was a blast to just have some guy time. You know what I mean? It's just like, there's something, that if you really, I think if keeping in line with this conversation, if you embrace the fact that you enjoy, or I enjoy, like just hanging out with some guys and having some bro time and, having some of those like male conversations, if you will. And just it felt so good, to just be around, just that, just got man energy, if you will, or something
your
like that. Yeah.
body and your mind probably benefited from it.
Oh,
Right,
tremendously. Like,
literally.
yeah. I mean, we, granted, like, and, we were, drinking and smoking weed and stuff like that, and
Okay,
having
so
all
maybe
sorts
not
of
in
fun.
that.
No, but like, but it just like, we just opened up and had fun. And, we were even doing like, what might be considered like softer things or gay things. We're like doing yoga, and like helping each other, like kind of like I was a yoga teacher. My other friend was, and my other friend was that was there was like, he started running this very successful company. So we just had a lot of fun. And then some, and then we had some women come over a little bit later, and it changed the dynamic, but we still, that vibe was just kept going. And that connection piece, it's like, they've shown in studies, if you do not connect with a child, within the first, I don't know, it's like 2-3 weeks of them being born, they'll die. Like, that child dies. I mean, if they're not held, if they're not coddled, like, if they're not loved, and we need that. And, I think actually, John, and anyone who is listening, we definitely need to have an episode on, we've been trying or talking about the importance of connection all the time throughout the show. But I think it's important to have a episode on loneliness, and because it's a massive increase, that is driving also this mental health crisis that we're seeing, is that loneliness. Could we go a little bit deep? So we talked about connection. What about the the vulnerability piece of the circle of our humanity and our masculinity? And I think it's vulnerability, or being vulnerable, right? If you look, I mean, and maybe this is kind of where we go off track, right? Is I just was looking up really quick. Let's just look at the definition of vulnerability.
Sure.
And it says, as I wrote here, what men might think. This is like kind of like confined masculine idea, but this is literally how it's defined by in dictionaries: the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally, right? So that's like, so you read that, it's like, oh my God, got to get my defenses up. Here comes a shield. You know what I mean? Like, no vulnerability, no vulnerability. But it also means, as far as like, which leads to a more fulfilling life and greater relationships, is a willingness to show emotion or to allow one's weakness to be seen or known, willingness to risk being emotionally hurt. So why do we talk about, and vulnerability comes out a lot. I mean, what I like about, as we continually develop this show, John, like, we have more and more men reaching out to us like, I want to talk about vulnerability. I want to talk about vulnerability. So let's just talk about vulnerability again. And maybe also tying it, Ed, to the need for vulnerability as you're going through, this health crisis that you had with this heart attack, and how you let people in and how people are taking care of you. And so let's talk about vulnerability again.
Thanks, Will. I gotta be vulnerable again.
Yes. Suck it up. Okay.
No, I
be vulnerable.
I love that you brought the different definition from the dictionary in, because most men these days are not at risk of getting killed, right? In America, I mean, maybe, well, that's a good point. I mean, some men are for sure, especially like in some,
such a small percentage, right? Like
yeah, it's a small
so
percentage,
small.
but in like inner cities, you have a much higher chance. But I think what I'm struck by though is that even if you have that physical question of vulnerability, like there's so much about the traditional masculinity that honors that. Like you're taking you're being brave to be vulnerable, right? And Brene Brown talks a lot about this. So even just being exposing yourself, opening your arms as opposed to having that closed arms crossed over your chest posture suggests I'm bring it. I'm ready to engage with you. Let me hear your ideas or whatever you're going to bring. I'm comfortable enough in my own skin and how I'm standing that I can respond to you and not have to put up this, be in this crouch of combat. So I think there's something that there can be a conventionally manly approach to experimenting with vulnerability. And then on the emotional side, the side of exposing ourselves to what could be ridicule, say, or being looked down on in some fashion, it is needed, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean you have to expose all of your skeletons in your closet, all your worst sides. There's some great work out of Stanford Business School that suggests just expose 15% more than you otherwise would. David Bradford and I'm forgetting his co-author's name, but they have a book called Connect, and that's their strategy. Like, you don't have to feel like you've overdone it if you just put out 15% more, and then you can see if there's a reciprocation to build that deeper relationship. And in my case, with this piece and with this experience I had with anxiety, I was telling people, yeah, I was afraid I was incontinent when I first had a kid. I mean, how embarrassed! That's almost like the ultimate unmanly thing, not being able to control when you pee, right?
Right.
And it was like, in fact, I wasn't incontinent, but just the fear of it was so embarrassing. But the more I talked to people about that and what I was experiencing with a heart attack, so many people told me, yeah, I've had anxiety problems too, or I've had some kind of mental health challenge. And the level of depth in the friendships and the loving relationships I have with family and friends and also colleagues, you may have heard me say, like some of the people outside of my inner circle that I shared with, I feel like we're ready to be together for the rest of our lives. That's the level of intimacy that got built by me being vulnerable.
Yeah.
But you have to be mindful about it too, because you just mentioned the doctor who put her arm on your leg and told you, hey, that things are going to be okay. We're going to get you better. And in that moment, you kind of took the shield down. Now you're vulnerable again. But then you further talk about how when you're in the hospital and you're getting the get well soon cards and you're there in your your gown that's open in the back and you're like,
yeah,
then the He-Man, like the He-Man ultra masculine side comes back in you and like, oh no, I'm going to be masculine, I'm going to be okay. And then I think that's where the mindfulness comes into play, is that you have to be mindful that that's what you're doing again. And then, okay, I can drop this shield. I can drop the shield and I'm okay. And that's, I think, the tie-in between the two. But can you talk about how you notice that? And it's basically like a switch that we have to be aware gets tripped without our paying attention. And if not, if we're not paying attention, then that can really lead to detrimental relationships, detrimental health, and a lack of fulfillment.
So true, John. I think of the word practice being valuable in this regard, because mindfulness for me, and I'm curious about for you guys, it's not one and done. For me, it's
every day.
It's a muscle.
It's every
right?
day.
Okay, you have to keep working. You have to deal with those sirens every day, right? Well, and practice.
Thank you. Yeah. Fuck. I'm kidding.
But so
why'd you have to bring that shit up? I'm kidding. Sorry.
Right. So yeah, I am far from perfect at it, but I'm incrementally getting better. So I was able to notice, okay, it's creeping back in, that I feeling like a loser and weak, that I'm being cared for by all these people with their cards, as you put it,
Right.
John, and they're sending me all these great wishes of well-being, and I just had to, pry the circle open, you might say, to let
I
that
like
love
that.
in, really. And I would say, just even this last weekend, I spent a lovely weekend at an author's retreat of the folks that write books for the same publisher as Reinventing Masculinity, Barrett Kohler Publishers. And I walked a labyrinth. You guys have probably heard, know about labyrinths and that idea of being, it's a meditative practice to go through this journey in a physical space. And I realized that movie of not being the enough of a guy, enough of a person is so strong, because I'm considering writing another book that would be maybe based on this piece, among others. It's like a more of a memoir, a masculinity memoir. And in that labyrinth, I was like feeling the power of ancestors before me saying, "You got this." Like, you why not you? Don't doubt yourself so much. So that was a moment of becoming mindful of the doubts that plague me, and I think plague a lot of guys, that we don't feel like we measure up. Does that resonate for you guys?
100%. 100%.
Yeah, it definitely does. It's like, the practice can help with that too. That, instead of collapsing into that negativity bias, or, or only, growing and going only as far as our ancestors or like our parents or something like that, but taking that big leap, taking that, and that brings up also the, another part of the circle is that courage, right? The courage to get out on the skinny limb, whether that's like, writing another book or starting a new project, but also the courage to be authentic, to show up, to ask for help. Like, it's all, and as you continually exercise more of that courage, right, you really begin to see that we're pretty fucking unstoppable if we want to be, and what helps us to be continually more unstoppable is asking for help, like calling in other people, like, I don't know all the answers, or I don't, I don't know how to take this next step, but I want to, and you mentioned earlier as well, it's like surrounding yourself with people that are courageous, that are going to, push you forward, but also keep you honest, and make you think about things that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before, or without having that influence in your life. And that's connection. I mean, so that's, and what's this leading to, right? All this leads to growth, right? All this leads to growth. And if you're growing on the inside and you're taking that energy out into the world, like, you're inspiring others to grow. And it's like, instead of being in the island again, and just like, I can do it, man, I forget the quote about, if you want to go fast, go alone, right? Yeah. If you want to go far, go together. Right. And, and it works the only way we've created this entire society, this beautiful world. I mean, I live in the city, like these giant fucking skyscrapers all over the architecture that goes into them, like the math, and then the hard work that it takes. I mean, it's completely impossible without us collaborating, connecting, cooperating, and what really makes anything thrive is that compassion, that connection, that authenticity.
Will, I feel like you're just laying the groundwork for covering the 5 C's.
Let's do it.
I think you covered 3 of them there. Courage, connection. I don't know what else you said.
Curiosity and commitment.
Yeah. So I know we covered this in our first Reinventing Masculinity episode, but Ed, if you could unpack the 5 C's from Reinventing Masculinity and explain that to the audience, if you have that at the ready.
Sure.
I got it right here at the ready.
Yeah, you guys you've named them wonderfully. Like, we see the 5 C's as a path to liberating masculinity, to breaking out of some of those confines, to living that full arrow and circle masculinity, the whole humanity piece. And you just named them, like curiosity. Start asking these questions that kind of get, again, smushed out of us when we're kids. You're not showing up as the smartest guy in the room and the best if you start asking questions. But then the courage piece, and Will, I love how you talked about how it is courageous to ask for help. And guys, we have the ability to be courageous, but typically we limit it to certain realms. like the physical realm, the financial realm. We'll do something hard. We'll take a risk in it with our business, but can we be courageous in the emotional realm? To be going out on the skinny limb, as you put it, and maybe acknowledging our fears, say. And then the compassion piece, we've got it in us, even if we got to unearth it a bit, and a lot of times our behaviors are compassionate and sacrificial, but we're not super explicit about being willing to say, I do care about you, or even I care about myself, and stop beating ourselves up. That's the first place we can express compassion.
Compassion for men could look like, I got you, bro. Yeah, and that's as far as it goes. You know what I mean?
That's a start.
And sometimes, and that's a start. And I'm not saying it can't go any deeper. I mean, it doesn't. But like that could be where it stays. You know what I mean? I got your back. Which means a lot. You know, depending on circumstance. Yeah. Sorry. So continue.
Well, it's you're getting at this. So then connection would be the next thing. And how much connection can you do if you're only saying, I got your back, bro? Like the connection piece is when you're developing the intimacy and the relationship. And we're willing to talk and about not just even the fears and the wounds, but the joys. Like we don't even feel like we can share what, moves our spirit or makes us happiest or what our biggest dreams are often, because that also can look too weird, So I think there's space to go in either direction there on the connection piece. The last C is commitment. Can you make this a practice, as we were talking about? Almost like you got a meditation practice. Can you work on evolving, growing as a man, as you put it, Will, because there's something that's so rich and so much more fulfilling about life when you are embracing that full humanity.
Yeah. I don't think we need to wait until we're in our 40s or 50s or have a heart attack or, you know what I mean?
Yes.
to right. I mean, in order to go to these places, like I would, and I think we're seeing it more in schools and the younger generations and stuff, but it's there. It's all waiting, to enhance your life, really. Tremendously. Yeah, please.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I do think there's stuff happening with like socio-emotional learning in schools.
Yes.
John's kid is probably going to be benefiting from this. How old is you got a daughter, John, or two?
I've got 3 kids, 5-year-old. Yeah. So since we talked, we've had another one. We had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So
okay, you're spacing them out nice and evenly. Yeah. Well, they're teaching. My kids got trained in like conflict resolution skills that were such that when my brother, sometimes I can think of him as my brother, my son got into a scuffle with one of his best friends, and the guy shoved him into a garbage can. He's like, you can't do that to me if we're going to be friends anymore. That it was, rather than like feeling really small or getting into a fist fight, it was talking with him in a kind of clear, I think he said, I don't feel safe with you when you do that. And you can't do that to me and be friends. So it was like, oh my God, why didn't I do that with the bullies way back in the day? That's what's been trained for the kids. And if we, Will, you were making me think it is an individual thing to make your life better, but we need, I think, to embrace this divine feminine spirit for the world right now. Right. Because that's what we need, And there's a great quote from Matthew Fox, a scholar. Can I just read this one thing he says about how he thinks we've banished the divine feminine for about 1,000 years or so, or a couple thousand years. And he says, the male soul has been profoundly wounded by this history, as has the female soul. Today, the stakes for finding a sacred marriage of the divine feminine and sacred masculine have never been higher. Our survival hangs in the balance. And to me, that's about global warming. It's about stopping wars. It's about reducing the inequality that leads to populism. It undermines democracy. It's a global issue, not just a personal one, as I see it.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
Maybe I think we've kind of like we maybe have not given enough props to the arrow side a little bit of masculinity. I know we kind of like trashed it a little bit, or in the ways that it becomes toxic, the ways that it becomes turns into violence or turns into anxiety or turns into a heart attack. So maybe can we just maybe touch on how the arrow helps us, and then maybe and then bring it back, and then the whole, again, the humanity, we call it, HuMANity, embracing your humanity. Like, so you can still be a man, be masculine, but like, you're going to be a better man and a better human and have better humanity if it's you're all of it. So let's maybe talk about the arrow a little bit, and how it's helped our lives or something, if you will.
I'm glad you're asking that. I mean, from my perspective, I think I want to honor that arrow and the way
Hell yeah.
it's played out, like in things like John's service, in the military, when we've got people sacrificing their lives, a lot of men or women embracing that kind of arrow, spear energy and actual arms to protect people, to battle, repressive regimes, that sort of thing. I also think in the more day-to-day life, like being purposeful, like having a plan, like having a goal that you're going after, and accomplishing things for your family, for yourself, for the good of the wider world. Entrepreneurs have a lot of that kind of arrow energy. These things are all, I think, honorable and noble. I think in my own case, I'm just thinking about losing weight. Like I'm being very mindful in a kind of, I think, arrow way, but like I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to like be eating less. And it's like very focused, that's the arrow energy to like, I want to get a little fitter and get past COVID-19 here. So I think it's super important. That's why I love that quote from Matthew Fox. It's the marriage of the divine feminine and the sacred masculine. That is what we need. So I don't know if that helps address the question you're asking, Will, but that's how I see them.
Well, it's being strategic, I think, is part. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, setting up the dominoes and then knocking them down, working towards goals, I think, is very important. And I mean, I think it's I think of the arrow as leading. Being a leader, not a boss. That's a little bit.
Yeah.
That's kind of the arrow gets a little bold and a little too sharp sometimes, and a little too aggressive, like thrusting or something. But being a good leader, I mean, you have a direction to go in, and how do you lead? And we've had boss versus leader, 2 episodes on boss versus leader, and talk about what it makes an effective leader, and a lot of it is, it's a marriage and a balance between the circular and the arrow. And here's an ambulance guy. Okay, hey, you go.
I'll
we
take
love
over.
You.
So
we love you. That's it, right? Sorry.
Well, I mean, it
That's
comes
what I have
back
to
to what
say.
you were talking about earlier, Will and Ed. We have both sides, literally on both sides of our body. I mean, if we were to just cut one half of our body off, I mean, what does that do for us? We have both. We have that masculine and feminine energy, and they are in all of us. So why not tap into them? Because there are benefits from both sides. It only makes sense. And don't squash either one completely, right? Marry them and figure out what's best from both sides.
I was watching. You guys see? Did you see the episode on Apple TV? SCE.
I've seen the first episode.
It's pretty. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe this brings out my masculine side. I like the violence in it sometimes. You know what I mean? Like seeing all the. But there's this. Actually, I was watching yesterday's episode, and it was a father to son scene, and like the father was help fathering his son, and he's a prince, and he was talking about, he goes, what makes a great king, because you can be king someday, and he realized that you can see the book, I'm not going to be king. He goes, is being compassionate.
Oh wow.
Right. And which is great, right? But also the next sentence, he goes, I don't have as much compassion, and I think that's what makes me a warrior, or something like that. So it's like, it was interesting to hear him having this very touching conversation, talking about compassion, talking about like, I think to be a warrior, right, you need, there's got to be, maybe you can talk to this, John, a little bit. There's got to be some of like, no, like it's not humans. They're like enemies or something like that. So
no, it is tough to be fully compassionate towards your fellow human being on the battlefield. At some point, you have to almost objectify the enemy and not you can't personify them. You have to almost, and that's a horrible way of living. You can't live your life that way, but there's times on the battlefield you have to kind of draw that line. I mean, because it's either them or you or your buddy next to you. So in a way, you draw that line and you're like, okay, compassion can come out later. Right now,
Yeah.
I'm on the battlefield, and there's been times, right, on the battlefield where afterwards we take prisoners. We don't call them prisoners anymore. I forget what we call them. But anyhow, we take them, and at that point, you're like, oh wow, this person that I was just shooting at is in fact another human being.
Wow.
And that human being, as we're taking them away from their village, their sons and daughters are crying right over here about our taking them away. And it really, and at that point, it really drives home the point that these people are in fact just that. They are people with their own lives, their own aspirations, their own dreams, their own families. And that's a tough one to be. It's tough to be a warrior and be compassionate at the same time. I think.
Well, that's a very extreme circumstance, but then what happened, but I feel a lot of men, to go back into like the hyper masculine toxic side, it's like the whole world looks like a battlefield. So everything is transactional.
I think that's, I'm glad you said that, because I have hope that if we were to do that, elevating or resuscitating the divine feminine, we're going to be able to move to a place of peace, world peace. You guys call me a John Lennon idealist over here, but I can imagine it. I mean, there's the word imagine. Right. His song title. if we did awaken that in folks, and I think there's something about having that circle of connectivity extend to the entire world, not just your tribe or your country, but it's a sense of we are human beings. We're all humanity, that we could get to that place. And a lot of it is going to be letting go of some of the ego and reducing, crazy levels of inequality. And there's a lot of work to be done in that direction. But I think that this, I'm so glad you guys elevated this topic of the divine feminine, or the feminine energies, the circle energies, because it strikes me as critical to healing men and healing the world toward a place of peace where we won't have to have John and others out there fighting. We'll be compassionate warriors. It's just be the pure, we're going to defend compassion and we're going to express it, but we're not going to be killing each other anymore.
I like that. Yeah, it reminds me of astronauts, right? When they first go up into space and they look back at the globe and they get what's called the overview effect. They don't see the borders that we've drawn. They don't see the conflicts. They don't see the wars. They see the globe, and they know that on this single globe, we are all on this together, and we have to do that life thing together, not fighting one another. We all just need the overview effect. If we could somehow all just
get everybody to space. Yes.
Well, that's what's happening, right? Blue Horizon and Virgin Galactic, right? I think they're bouncing people up to space, and I think this might be a great place to
you're like, okay, we're talking about space.
Let's not at all. No, I mean, hey, we can keep talking, but I think we hit on a bunch of great things here. And Ed, if you want to just close with some words, or please promote anything that's coming up, because I love what you're doing, Ed, in the world, and thank you. I mean, I can't thank you enough for this book. And how it's like literally the way that I see the world. I know I'm probably speak for John as well. It's changed. Right. It's changed, and the conversations we have, and the awareness that's created, and in this article as well. I mean, that you wrote, that we'll put in the show notes. I really highly recommend anybody out there definitely pick up Reinventing Masculinity. Definitely read the. It's funny. The article is written on the Good Man's Project, right? And I think their subtitle is The Conversations We're Not Having. Because that's where we're going. So Ed, take us away, please.
Thanks, Will. And I again want to appreciate you guys for what you're doing, and this mindfulness piece. That is a path forward too. You get them to space, or get them to sit in space.
We're gonna fucking meditate in space. That's what we're doing.
Right? That's a double whammy. That'll really accelerate our progress, right? I guess just to sum things up from my perspective is. To be a whole human being, you have to acknowledge and revere and celebrate the masculine and the feminine that we all have in us. And there is such a benefit to it. You can have such a fuller life if we do that as men.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ed. Thanks again for being here with us today, and for the books you've written, for the articles you've written. We'll put all that in the show notes. We look forward to your next book coming out. Sounds like it's going to be a very vulnerable and open book, really expressing your true strength and your humanity. And I love that you're doing that. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And for our audience, if you've liked this episode, check out Ed. We'll put his how to get a hold of him in the show notes and everything else. And thanks for tuning in. If this episode has resonated with you, please share it with a friend, a family member, a male buddy who maybe needs to hear this, or a masculine type buddy. Share it with them because it is important that we get this work out there. We're not out there for our egos, at least not all the time.
But there's a balance there too, right?
We're wanting to share this work with you and your friends and your family and everyone to make this world a better place. So thanks for tuning in, and until next time, peace.
Peace, everybody. Thank you, Ed.
Joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out Men Talking Mindfulness